We're on to recording. Welcome for everybody who could come on live today for the YYC rental housing providers. We're super lucky today to have a couple of great guest speakers. I think everyone knows who I am, but just in case, I'm Laura Atherton, and I'm usually hosting, and I'll try not to do I'm not going to do too much of the talking, which is definitely new for me today. I do have it set up, and it's just going to be our panelists here sharing. We're going to go through fairly light kind of interview style. They're going to share their information, but I do have the chat open. So what I want is just, I'm sure everybody is almost too familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case, for questions, we're just going to use the chat box, and I will keep an eye on it. Make sure you do put it for all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what your questions are, and I'll catch them throughout. But we're just going to go through and share a bit of the information. So what I'd like to do, of course, is just introduce our two guests tonight. We're going to have a great time here for the next, I've got us blocked for about an hour to an hour and a half to have enough time for questions. And so certainly I have Shelley Visor from Front Door Investments, who is a real estate investor and unfortunately has had quite the experience with some of the more recent hail damage. So we're very, very lucky to have her. She's going to come on today and share some pretty candid facts about what her experience has been like. And I'm really interested to find out, and unfortunately sometimes learn from others' bad fortune. I hope that's okay, Shelley, but it really is going to make a big difference to share with our membership here. And then, of course, also Paul Boudreau, who's here from My Group Insurance. So he's going to give us the skinny on insurance, give us some tips and tricks. I mean, I do review my policies, but I have to be honest. I think I was maybe, no one had admitted it in our poll that I did in the group, but my policies had certainly gotten dusty. So it was something to make sure that we're taking a look. Shelley just shared some really interesting information with me as I was, as we were just chatting ahead of time about items and changes happening to our policies without her even knowing. So having policies set up and then things being changed. So let's make sure we know what to look for. So we'll have Paul share with us on that. And I think it's set for a really good evening. It is going to be recorded, so we will have that for those who can't come on live today. But Shelley, so I'm going to put you right on the hot seat right from the start. And what I'd really like you to do, honestly, is if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and even how you got into real estate investing.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to tonight. And you know, you were saying, oh, to learn from my bad experience. You know, I thought if there's one way to make this positive is if somebody else can learn or I can save some other people money, then it's worth talking about, because it really, that's how we work and learn as investors. So my name is Shelley Visser. My company name is Front Door Investments. I've been investing for probably 20 plus years. I managed multifamily large units to start with. And then had some bad investments that, like a lot of other people, got lost. People did go to jail, but it doesn't mean you get your money back. So I kind of went, you know, I don't ever want somebody to feel that devastation, and where can I have my money feel secure? And really, real estate is where it's going to be at. So, and I always had a love for real estate, you know, just from apartment managing, and I used to do interior design and decorating. And so I always had that draw to it, and so just kind of got into real estate investing. So I invest in flips, in buy and hold suited properties. I do wholesaling, so I'm not sure how creative your people are, but also ventured into the creative real estate side as well, but more on the wealth building and trying to balance with the income building. So wealth building meaning my buy and holds, income building on wholesaling and flipping market. So, and I work with joint ventures and private money lending, and yeah, so kind of all the gamuts, all of it.
Absolutely, and I bet that's only going to bring up more questions even, so there'll be lots of opportunity to get into many other pieces for that for sure, and I appreciate you sharing that. So tell me a bit about what happened. Like, what was it like for you? How did the call come in? Like, were you concerned when the storm started, or like, can you just share with us what that day or what that evening was like for you?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually very significant in the fact that I was at one of the properties. We had just done the lease renewal. It was, oh gosh, it's her fourth renewal at least. So we have a good relationship, and I try and have really good relationships with all of my tenants. So I'd done the inspection floor to ceiling, which is really interesting that day we did lease renewal and I had the full floor to ceiling or top to bottom inspection done. And we were just actually outside chatting away and just talking about kids and, with what things were going on a little bit with COVID and all of that. And all of a sudden I could see off on the side, and this is in Saddle Ridge. So I could see south. I was like, that storm. And we could start seeing the lightning coming. And then the rain was starting to come. And I just said to my tenant, I said, okay, I'm going to head out of here because I got to drive to the north and I don't want to be driving when the rain hits hard. And of course we didn't want to stay outside getting wet. So I literally get home. It's about 7:40 at night. I walk in the door and this sounds really benign, but I was just like, oh my God, I'm starving. I haven't eaten all day. I've been dealing with tenants, right? I'm like, I cannot wait to just eat supper or lunch, something, right? So I had literally dropped my stuff off and all of a sudden my phone rings and I look and I see a tenant at my Martindale property. And I was like, oh, this isn't good. And I just knew, because I knew with the way the storm, with the lightning and the way the rain was coming down, I'm like, she's probably going to be calling to say hail is damaging the siding. So I answer obviously right away, and she is rightfully so extremely agitated. And she's like, oh my God, you're not going to be happy, Shelly. She's like, the hail is coming through the windows. And at that moment, I can hear it whizzing. I can literally hear it like baseball bats hitting, and that metallic sound as it's hitting the siding, as it's hitting the guy, and I can hear the windows smashing. And then of course she's screaming, and I'm like, oh my God. So it's the worst feeling, being on the other end of the phone and being so far away and knowing you can't do anything but hear the damage happening. So obviously I'm like, get away from the windows. Like, I don't care. Like, don't worry about it. Just get away from the windows. Your safety is more important. So we stayed on the phone talking for probably about 10 minutes. But as I'm talking with her, my other line goes off, and it's now my Saddle Ridge tenant is calling me, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go. And I'm thinking to myself, how many calls from how many tenants am I going to start getting? So my Saddle Ridge tenant, who I just left, she's like, oh my God, Shelly, it's not good. Like, the house is like a war zone. So I'm just talking them down off the ledge, because really there's nothing you can do. And I think that's the key thing to start with right there is don't get emotionally responsive, because you're only going to aggravate. And right now they need you to be calm. They need you to be a grounding force, because they're freaking out on their home. And a lot of tenants have never gone through this. And so really it was, don't worry about it. Right now, the most important thing is your safety. Get away from the windows. We'll fix that up. We'll patch it up. We'll figure it out. But right now, I just need you to be safe, and we'll get it all dealt with. And so I just said to them, when it's not lightning or hailing and it's safe, go outside, start taking pictures, and start taking some videos for me. I'm going to need it to see what's going on, but to get started. So we hung up. I told my tenant to stay away from the windows. Obviously, once it stops, then we can sweep up and we'll figure it out. And so at that point I just took a breath. I was like, oh, crumb, this is going to be bad.
Oh, well, and it went on for a long time, right? Like, what time, like, tell me about, like, what did that look like? You've got open windows. You've talked to the tenants about their safety. Are people going to a hotel that night? Like, what kind of thing, what happened to the rest of that evening before, things kind of died down?
Yeah. So thankfully, in the one property, the Saddle Ridge property, the windows were just either cracked or they had weirdly scratch marks. So as the hail slid across the side, it took dings out of it, and like you can see like big scratches, but they didn't shatter.
Okay.
Everything else is absolutely destroyed. The Martindale house, the windows are destroyed. So I put out a quick call, and I had a friend who, thankfully, he rose up to the equation, and it was getting late. At that point, it was about 8:15, and with COVID, everything is closing early. And so we're like, oh my God, we've got to block these windows because they can't be open for the whole night. There's glass everywhere. The water's coming out. I've got to minimize the damage. So thankfully, he's like, I can run to Home Depot quick. I'm going to grab sheets of plywood. And I said, just grab 6 of them, because I'm trying to quickly think, how big are these big picture windows? And it's these big, massive windows. So I'm trying to think, how many sheets of 6-foot sheets am I going to need to cover the windows to at least give them some protection? So I just said, grab 6. We can always return what we don't need. So he did that. I jumped in my car and then started to drive there, because we thought that storm was done. Turns out it was only the first part of the storm. And so then as we're driving there, of course, we're getting flooded out of streets. You can't get through. 3 of the 4 access roads were completely flooded and got like cars everywhere. And then, so we took other routes. And this is why it's really good to know many different routes into your neighborhoods. Wow. And I take a lot of different routes all the time, just to see what the neighborhoods are like and just to see the growth. Thank goodness I knew some of the little small side streets, because otherwise I would not have known how to get into my properties. Like literally it was flooded right out and tree limbs were down everywhere. So we get there, and my friend and I, we, thank goodness for him, helped screw sheets of plywood. And then the skies opened up again, and here we are on a metal ladder with lightning touching down around us, more rain, more hail, like I was drenched. But we had to just be out there, because the windows are open, like there's water coming in, right? So it took a couple sheets lined up, and we're holding it. One of the neighbor guys, he came over to help us hold sheets up so we could get it drilled in. And then 2 days later, we had to go back and use big 2x4s and secure on both of those, because it's so much. It's so big that the weight, it's blocking it. So,
wow.
Yeah. So now it's like a little vampire dark place inside. So now I want to actually is remove the wood now that we're getting at the end of the rainy hail season, and then put up the heavy vinyl plastic, which is going to be more waterproof, I think. But give them some light until we can get windows, because windows will be on back order. There's so many windows that are going to have to be.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the next level of delays and all of that. I'm sure you'll share a bit with us on that piece.
Yeah.
How have you found? So I mean, I caught that. I mean, in that moment, like really great with the tenants. Like I love that piece about just making sure everybody's safe, not getting emotionally tied, like just calming down. It's okay, we're going to handle it. What further kind of next pieces have you had from before we get deep into the insurance, but from the tenant side of things, what other pieces or things have you had to do to kind of, I guess, compensate or support the tenants during this process, or what does that look like?
It's a lot of communication. I make sure that, first off, you want to make sure they're okay. I've had them give me lots of pictures. Unfortunately, that happened Saturday night. I was out there till 1 a.m. And then at 5:30, I was packing. I had a conference I had to leave for. So it was a little bit, and I debated about going or not, but I thought it's done now. I have to wait for insurance. So I emailed my insurance right away that night, just say, let's get this process started. You know, I'm sure you're going to I'm not the first one you're going to get. I thought jumping on the queue would have helped me a little bit be first, but turns out it doesn't really matter. But in regards to my tenants, a lot of communication. Thankfully, the Saddle Ridge home, they can still live in the house. It's still fine. I just keep talking to them, and I keep saying to them, if you see any more damage, just let me know. Like, don't be afraid to communicate to me, because things are going to show up over the next few days. And just let me know, document it, send me pictures, just so that we have that documentation for insurance as well. So a lot of that, I called them a few times to, how are you guys doing? Because all their cars were destroyed as well. All of their barbecues, their furniture as well. Plus, you have to imagine all the siding, particularly in Saddle Ridge, which is Northeast Calgary, for those that don't live in Calgary, it's like a war zone, and you can't even imagine how it looks. And I took my neighbor the other day for a drive still, and she just kept gasping everywhere we went. And I said, you should have seen this before, because I call it like shrapnel. All that siding is vinyl. It just shatters and explodes. It's all over, and there's tree branches everywhere. All the trees are just bare limbs now. You literally look like you're walking through a war zone. It's surreal to see how it is. The biggest thing, though, I think, is no one was hurt. That's all I care about. Yeah. No one was hurt. So back to your thing. Talk to the tenants. Now, my one tenants where the windows are busted, we've boarded it up. Obviously, they cleaned up the glass. There's not a lot else we can do other than communicate. They've been great in letting us have access all the time with the restoration company. That's a whole other story. My downstairs tenants, We have the insulation and the drywall off. It's in their bedroom. Thankfully, it's summertime. If it was winter, it might be a little bit cooler, but we'd have to put heaters down there. On the plus side, because of COVID, she's actually staying in Airdrie a lot of the time because her daughter has to go back to work but has no childcare for her granddaughter. So she gets to do grandma duty, which she's very excited about. When she's supposed to come home on the weekends, I've just let her know, here's the fans. I've sent her pictures on how to turn off the humidity fans or dehumidifier fans, all of that. But she chose to stay away because of the noise, and it just allowed us to dry it out better. So again, a lot of communication. Nothing out of my pocket at this point. And regardless, let's say it was flooded that they couldn't be. Not to sound cold, it is not my responsibility to pay for their hotel. That's what their tenant insurance is for. Now, saying that, when we finish this process, most likely I will be getting her, you know, something, a massage certificate, a night out at a restaurant, something for the inconvenience, because now we're going to start the remediation process, which we'll go into after. But so far I've been lucky in that there's been no cost, other than my own cost for boarding up everything. For the tenants, they're like everybody else. It's not like I'm a one of. Everyone's in the same boat. There's more than 10,000 people living like that, right? So why would you move into a hotel when your neighbor's in the same house with the same damage?
Same situation. And I appreciate that on the tenant insurance, because I hope that most people know that or are sure, you know, make sure they request it, have it in our leases. But I think the secondary piece is, you know, on those renewals, making sure we're getting copies of the renewal of insurance, making sure we're getting that confirmation. So, you know, I appreciate that in just a reminder out that while we're reviewing our own policies and talking about those things, that we are also ensuring that our tenants are giving us up-to-date insurance and watching those expiry dates on that. So,
and on that note, oh, sure. And on that note, whenever I talk to my tenants, and I always say to them, make sure that you have not only replacement insurance, but you have coverage for a hotel for at least 2 weeks or a month, because not all those policies have it. And I'm sure Paul can refer to that. But I've said, regardless of the hail, I said, you know, if there was a tub leak upstairs and now you're flooded out of your suite, I said, it's not, and I tell them right in front, it is not my responsibility to pay for that hotel for you. I said, that's through your insurance. And so it's really important that you have that, because as much as I feel bad for you, that's not my responsibility. So I let them know.
We have our hands full. Like what I often explain to tenants when I'm signing leases is, you know, when we're looking at those multi-insurance and those components of it is, you know, essentially the landlord has their hands full in their insurance in what they need to cover for that envelope of the property, for the repairs, for all of those things. The tenant's insurance needs to cover the needs of the tenant. And that's exactly why they need to have it as well. So no,
a lot of education.
Yeah. All the time, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is education for our members, for each other, but also for our tenants. And you know, I've had, not to get in on the tenants, but certainly I've had a lot of new ones, a lot of young ones moving out for the first time, and there's a whole lot of learning in that. So Shelley, tell us about this insurance experience so far, and what you're able to or open to share with us without any swearing or minimal.
Yeah, no. The insurance experience has been enlightening. It has been very different. I had a hail experience 4 years ago with the Saddle Ridge properties. A lot of people might remember when Saddle Ridge got hit and that northeast quadrant got hit again with bad hail. Not as bad as this time. So I'd already had a hail claim where we had to do the roof, the siding, the fence, the shed, you know, and it was about a $26,000 hail claim. So I went in thinking, all right, so here we go. Call the insurance, get the adjuster out there to give me the quote, get my quotes. We'll book the work. It's going to take a little bit. Yeah, been there, done that. It's not unfamiliar. This has been a whole different experience. And I think some of the problem, in fairness, is the volume, the absolute volume of destruction, the mass amount of destruction. So in fairness, I think insurance is brokers, I think insurance companies and restoration companies, everyone is completely overwhelmed. I'm seeing though, where big companies that are supposed to be experts in destruction are highly disorganized. And that's not okay. I expect that from a small company. I don't expect it from a national company. And and what I'm dealing with is a lot of feel sorry for us because we're overwhelmed. And I'm like, oh, no. Oh, no. Like, yeah, that sucks. But you know what? That's your company. That's your job. So not that I don't feel like I don't want to come across as cold and heartless, but every single time they come, all I ever hear about is how overwhelmed in work they are. And I'm thinking, oh, buddy, no, this is not okay. And a lot of lack of accountability for what they're not doing and what they're supposed to be doing. That's kind of on the remediation. When it comes to my insurance, now there's two different aspects. There's the broker, and then there's actually my insurance company. So my insurance protector or coverage is through Aviva. So I've only talked to the lady once or twice at the beginning. They were fairly quick in responding back to me about what was going on and then setting up. And the only reason I've actually heard from her is because of the flood. Because when all the windows were shattered and the basement's flooding, now we're having to deal with mildew and mold and prevention, right? The whole idea is prevent as much damage, prevent costs, all of that. So I think that's why I heard from them, because all the other properties, I've heard nothing from them since that initial call. But I'm thinking it's because their process is, I've called them, they now take it and send it out to, is an adjudicator or just somebody who's going to give the quotes of the damage. So I'm just in a queue. At one point, she said I was number 600 in the queue.
Okay. Out of 10,000, that's not bad, I guess. But
right? That's what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the good. Number 600. Woo! Less than 1%. I'm a winner. So yeah, it's so I'm waiting, but it's frustrating because in all my properties, we haven't even been quoted. And I'm watching other people get their roofs and siding done. I'm like, oh, as somebody who is very proactive and get things done, because I have a lot of stuff on my plate. So this hanging over my head is a frustrating, right? I'd rather just deal with it, get it done, cross it off my list, and then I can move on to something else. I can't. So the insurance experience has been very different from the last one. Interior damage is far more different. And I even said today, I don't even know what's going on in my property. I have no control. You guys are just coming in and out. Nobody's telling me anything. I don't know what's going on. And I said, it stops now. I need to know what's going on in my property. I said, this is ridiculous that it's taking this long. I said, the very first night we cut out all the drywall and insulation. She's like, you did that? I said, yeah. So when you guys called me 2 days ago to say you wanted to do demo, I said, demo of what? I demoed it. And you don't even know what you're demoing because you haven't got the water readings yet that they came today to do, but they already called me yesterday to do a demo. And I said, well, what are you demoing? Oh, well, we're just going to demo. That's my job, is to book a demo. I said, well, you can't demo something. And I said, I'm not going to allow you to charge my insurance because that's called fraud.
Right.
Right. So
wow. So the unorganization piece, that the layers of frustration I'm hearing, Shelley, is just, I couldn't imagine the timing, disorganization. I think you and I are probably very similar in those kinds of things. We're just organizing, get it done. What is in your control right now? What can you, what do you feel that you can do?
That's a great question. So I have no control whether they show up or not. We've had multiple appointments booked that they just don't show up for. But that's my fault because they're the victims. So what I'm in control of is communicating with my tenants. And my tenants have been phenomenal in that lots of times I've not been able to give them 24 hours notice. Mm-hmm. And so I think, going forward is have those amazing tenants. And if you don't, get rid of them and get an amazing tenant. Because when the crap hits the fan and I'm calling them saying, hey, you know what? The remediation guys just called. Are you okay if we come in the morning and take a look? They're like, absolutely. And we just come in and out and they don't care. So what I can control is my relationship and my communication with my tenants. What I can control is on the days when I feel very overwhelmed, take a step back. And you know what? I'm not calling these guys back every single day because they call me quite often and say, okay, we can be there in half an hour. I'm sorry, half an hour? No, your disorganization is not really my problem. I have to give my tenants notice. I say this every time, 4 times a day. I get 4 different people calling me. Nobody knows what's going on. I'm told numerous times we'll be there in half an hour. No, so I book it for the next day so I can give notice to the tenants. And even if my tenant was good with that, I can't run out either. We all have other things we're booked with. But I can control that I do not have to get emotionally involved in their disorganization, right? So a couple times when they've left messages or they've called me, I've just let it go to voicemail because I was dealing with something else that is just as important. In realizing, don't get caught up in that sense of urgency that it feels like. It really does feel like it. But you know what, at this point, the water damage is done.
Well, it's just creating
right?
something that already is a stressful experience and making it chaotic when it doesn't need to have to be at that. It's already
Absolutely.
happened, like you've said. So I really appreciate what you've shared, because I think that helps a lot. Tell us a bit about your coverage and issues that happen there, if you'll please share with us.
Sure. So my coverage was with a company that had pursued us, myself and other investors. At the very beginning, they were fantastic. So when the floods happened in Calgary, I had double checked my policy, and he's like, no, you have flood insurance. So even if it had been overland flooding, you had full coverage on all your properties. Great. I had been told I had tenant damages coverage. I knew what my deductible was. I had chosen $2,500, which is higher. Most people in a residential have $1,000 deductible. I chose $2,500. There's pros and cons to that, and you have to know your budget. You have to know what your tax write-offs are, all of that. But it just worked out better for what I could get. But we also had a group discount. It was also under a commercial umbrella. So because once you get to a certain number of properties, you get a commercial umbrella package, or supposedly. And maybe Paul can refer to that after. I'm here, and understand too, insurance does change throughout. Like what I had coverage for 15 years ago doesn't exist now either. Just like everything, it changes. However, when I had the hail claim 4 years ago, I paid my $2,500. We got everything covered. It was a good experience as far as, having that damage can be. You understand the process. This time, though, when I called, he's like, oh, you have $5,000 deductible per property. Excuse me? $5,000? What happened to my $2,500? He goes, oh, we changed that. I'm like, you didn't tell me. So then we're going through it, and I'm finding out the flood, and they're like, oh, you don't have your flood protection. Excuse me? What happened to my flood protection? I had that. No, we changed that. So these are considered significant changes in a policy that a broker is supposed to tell you about. The only emails I had were the ones that I think everyone has received over the last few years, is because of the Fort Mac fires, the Calgary floods, the hailstorms. Like, we've all had our premiums increased. Mm-hmm. So I had those emails. And yes, I needed to go and get it checked by another broker on, I knew I was paying more than other policies were, but I kind of went with, you know what? I'm paying more than other people. I'm not happy with it, but I didn't have time to get it checked. But I went, you know what? They're giving me way better coverage and a better experience than I've had with other people. I'm okay to pay that little bit right now, because I felt from my last experience, I had such great experience and great coverage. It kind of balanced where I was at. And I thought, no, if things go wrong, at least I know I'm not going to have the big battle. So you can imagine my surprise when I find out I don't have flood protection. And overland flooding is not as common, but that's what I had before. And also, of course, to find out all of a sudden I'm paying $5,000 deductible and I'd never been told. To me, that's not okay. Mm-hmm. Those are things that I should have been told about. So saying that, Aviva, actually the lady there, so they're the insurance provider, she's actually told me I can go after the broker. And I've talked to some other people, and they said they actually have something called a liability insurance. I think it's called O&E. Is that E&O,
errors and omissions, yeah.
Thank you. And because I said, is it really worth it? Because what am I fighting for? $2,500 difference per house. So there's $5,000 plus, well, at the time was my flood protection. Now today I've just found out they do agree that it did come from the windows, and that's a whole other, how they figured that out. But, so now at this point, I was thinking, is it really worth the $5,000? Because you pick your battles, pick your stress. I have enough going on, right?
Well, and then and you mentioned earlier, which is separate from the hailstorm, but that you've got some water coming in another place. It's a completely different situation. So, think about how you've managed to even stay remotely. Well, thankfully, a sense of humor, I think, must help. There's a few things like that I think you have to have as rental housing providers. But yeah, I totally, the picking your battles and the stress for sure. But I think overall understanding your rights and that something's happened to you that shouldn't have happened, right?
Correct.
And I mean, we can't control the hailstorm or these other things, but for something to change and not be informed, what would you say, like either just overall to everybody listening now or that's going to listen to this later recorded, what would be maybe something significant that you learned or possibly something you would do differently as a result of this?
I think, and I'll be quite honest, I have been swamped this last while, 2 years or so, and I have not read my policies. So read your policies. I think looking at it and going, I can't change what I was going through. I was inundated because I had a whole bunch of stuff going on. I think what I would say is at that point, maybe send a quick email off to your broker and say, what's in this policy? What's changed? I shouldn't have to do that. I'm paying you as my broker to be responsible, be the business owner. That's why you're part of my team. So I would say find a way to squeeze that in if you have to, or get somebody to look at it for you. If you don't have the time to say, pay somebody, $25, $30 an hour or whatever, just say, can you tell me what's in my policy? Whatever, like that might be a thing. Other than that, even with all the chaos with the remediation, there's not much I can do to control that at all. So really it just becomes an internal control. And there's been a few times where I've been very overwhelmed and I just went, oh my God, white flag, I give up, I can't. And then you have to sit there and take a step back and go, okay, wait a minute, that's how we feel right now. Don't deal with anything. Go for a bike ride, go for a hike, drink some wine, talk to a friend, do something.
Right.
But give yourself a break from it and then kind of go, you know what? You're a professional. You're in a business. Remove the emotion and just go, okay, what's the one next step? And this is what I've taught in my coaching is when you're overwhelmed, it's don't look at the big picture. Go, what is that one next step you have to do? And just manage that one and make it breakable. And sometimes you just need a break. And sometimes you can go, okay, I just have to return that phone call. Okay, I can return a phone call tomorrow.
Yeah. Right? And I think that, I think all of us that have been strategic investors here, do our due diligence. We all know it, but I can speak for myself for sure in that whole busyness in letting things slide. I won't admit here completely how often I read my mail or even open it. When it's on that list of priorities and we have to consider that, but I think considering in the fact of, okay, so if that is on the low list of the priorities, then maybe we sub it out. Maybe we get someone else to open that mail, read it, send an email, whatever that case might be. And I really appreciate that because we know it, but we can't. I think there's an acceptance too to the fact that we can't do everything. Yeah. Some of us solo entrepreneurs and how we're bringing or building together a team, but that, definitely means that we might need some help. So I really appreciate that. What I'd like to do, I'd like to get Paul to kind of give us an overall on what we should be doing, what we should be looking for and asking on our policies. I'm watching the chat. Does anyone have specific questions they want to ask Shelley right now? Or what I'll do is I'll keep an eye on the chat to see as the questions come up. As long as if you send it to all panelists and attendees, then everyone can see the question. But we'll watch for that. We'll have more. Shelley's going to stay on with us. And then we'll hear a bit from the insurance side on exactly what should we be looking for. Paul, help us out and maybe kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're in insurance and how long you've been in insurance.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Shelley, for sharing your experience. Kudos to you for how you handled a very difficult situation and looking out for not just yourself, but others that you're involved with and your tenants. And yeah, it obviously goes to show how much you care about what you do and the people that support your endeavors. So thanks for having me on here, Laura. And insurance I know is everybody's favorite subject, so I'm going to try and keep it as light as possible, but just highlight some of the the key aspects of what Shelley shared as far as her claims experience, and then subsequent learning as far as what happened to her coverages and what coverages to look for, and then also go through just some of the basics about insurance. Again, not getting too deep, but my name is Paul Boudreau. I've been in the insurance business for over 20 years. Got into it. I have a family history. My grandfather was an insurance broker, had an insurance agency, and my uncles as well. And after I graduated university, I went right into that field. I was a technical person, but I was also a people person. So insurance as a broker kind of fit well for my personality. And I've enjoyed doing the service and sales side of insurance for many years, being in that sort of intermediary, as your broker should be, between you and the insurance company, looking out for the best interests of both, which is sometimes very difficult, but we try our best to do that, and that's what a good broker should do. And now I'm focused more on the sales side, so I bring in new business for the organization. I work for a broker called My Group Insurance Broker. We do insurance across the country for select groups that we sign on. So some of the groups that we deal with on a national basis are the Sobeys employees, coast to coast. We do the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, the Calgary Rental Association. We also do Restaurants Canada. So those are the types of groups that we handle on the group side. Everything started with us in a broker in Nova Scotia, AP Reed Insurance, which was Eileen Reed, who started the brokerage back in 1980. So we were celebrating 40 years. And since then, her son Jamie Reed has taken over the business and expanded it immensely. We have a Zipsure discount tenant insurance division under what's called the Storm Insurance umbrella. AP Reed's the retail side. We also have a specialty substandard market through Agile Insurance as well, and been very active. And so we're one of the few national brokers. And yeah, so I'm on the group side, and yeah, enjoy the sales part. So I bring new business in, get everybody set up, explain everything, and then hand them off to our great service team who handles it from there. So, so getting into the insurance policy side of it, I mean, you know, why you want to get insurance is to protect your investment. You know, you want to be able to mitigate your risk. I mean, everything you own, there's risk associated with that. Things can happen, things can break, either intentionally or unintentionally. You want to be able to repair or replace those, and then that's where insurance comes in. And some of your assets and investments are worth a lot of money. And you know, insurance is there for people who, you know, who otherwise would be, you know, financially in great hardship if they had a loss and had to pay for it themselves. So that's, you know, that's the basics of insurance as far as why we get it. And then, you know, we start to look at repairing and replacing when we have a loss, how that works. And of course, we finance some of our investments as well, and those people that help us finance also need their protection for their side of things. So, and then when we own things, we also have to look at, you know, things can happen with those things that we can be held liable for as well. So we want, you know, with all our insurance policies comes the liability portion, which covers, you know, for legal judgments that people may have against us, defense costs to defend those actions, and that can be for injuries that are people would have on your properties, or anything that could be considered where you could be considered negligent.
And I really appreciate that, Paul, too, because I think sometimes we get caught, like, I don't know what to ask. I don't know what I don't know. I don't work in insurance. So, you know, I think, you know, when we're, whether it's a broker or whoever we're going to for that piece is I'm wondering, and that's one of the things I was hoping at some point is like, how do we know what to check for? You know, I always forget about the liability because I'm like, everything's fine. Nobody's ever going to get hurt at my property but I mean, it's true. And we've got to, you know, protect ourselves as investors, protecting our assets, protecting all those pieces, but then it can go, how do we know when it's too much and too little? You know, so how do you help your clients kind of determine that? Like, I know you and I have a relationship, Paul, where thankfully we've blown a lot of the dust off my policies and started to kind of review. I've been really lucky. And I know I see some people messaging in the chat already asking Shelley if she would be staying with her current insurance company? I feel like I know the answer to that. And so, you know, Paul's obviously going to be available and his information will be shared in our group. But I think, you know, he'd be more than happy to feel free to take a look at what people might have and looking at, we do have opportunity for group discounts through the Calgary Residential Rental Association, which we can honor through this group as well. So, I mean, I think within that piece, but tell me a little bit, Paul, about how it is, how do you help your client determine what's best? You know, we can go all hog wild and have too much insurance, I'm sure, as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, from a liability perspective, I mean, one of the good things today, and I work primarily on the personal line side, so I'll just put that out there. There are a couple different ways, as Shelley mentioned earlier, to insure your rental and income properties is through the commercial line side. Obviously, and I'll go through a few points on that. If you're, you know, if it's your sole means of income, if it's something that, you know, if you have many units and you know, if there's other principals involved as well, if you're not the sole owner or somebody that's a spouse or direct relative, so there's other people involved, that's when you need to start looking into the commercial side and really just taking a look at the overall picture and what risks are involved, what's your exposure, and then from there, just sort of going back from there and seeing, well, what types of coverage do you need to have in place to cover those exposures appropriately? And what type of risk are you prepared to assume as far as deductibles go and optional coverages and that sort of thing. So it's really about communication. That's what it really comes down to at the end of the day, is having, you know, open and honest conversations and taking the time to, you know, ask the questions and for your broker to answer them. And you know, that's one of the things that with insurance, there shouldn't really be any questions as to what you're covered or not for. That's what our job is. And I'll just make a note on, as far as brokers and companies go, there are direct writing companies that have agents that work for them that write directly, and then there's brokers who deal with typically more than one company and are the broker in between the insured, you people, and the insurance company. And we work on both behalf to, you know, bring the types of risks the insurance companies want, and then also provide the proper coverage and explain, you know, exactly what's needed and find out what the needs are for each individual insured. So yeah, and so one of the things that was mentioned earlier that I'll touch on was requiring tenant insurance. Extremely important. It not only protects your tenants, it can also protect, you know, landlords, because if and wherever recommended, you know, we always recommend to put it in the lease if you can, because if the tenant you know, ends up being liable or negligent for something, then they end up having that liability that we just talked about that can cover them, where your policy may respond to the loss initially and then can subrogate against the tenant's insurance and have that covered so that loss doesn't count against you. And of course, that would be in situations where the tenant may have caused the loss, and there may be some question as to whether they were negligent because of it. And again, the other thing is, you know, we don't want to see people that are put out or financially devastated that are, you know, paying rent and long-term tenants in your property. So it's nice to have that security, knowing that if something happens, that they'll be looked after, that their, you know, their belongings will be replaced, and that they'll have somewhere to stay. And again, that additional living expenses coverage, which does cover, you know, added expenses for food, for travel, for accommodations, that can come into play even if the loss doesn't occur specifically in that tenant's unit. If it would be covered under their policy and it happened in the building and it restricts access to their unit, then they'd be covered under an additional living expenses portion of their policy. So that's always good to know.
Would you have any, like, I know we're asking that, I think everybody on here hopefully is asking for that. You know, what I'm understanding, or I'm starting to learn, or I'm sure we're barely cracked the code on this tonight, is that obviously not all insurances are alike. Not all insurance companies, not all insurance brokers, just with like anything else, don't get me going on the banks. So luckily tonight we're just talking about insurance companies. But in that, like, are there any, I don't know, cheat sheets or quick tips or ways that we can either, like, sharing for our own selves, on what to ask about our policies, but also even the tenants. Like, I hadn't thought to mention to the tenants sometimes to make sure what additional coverage, because I really want to make sure that liability is covered. That's kind of my bottom line, not that I don't care. But what kind of resources would you suggest, or is that something you can maybe share with the group later on how do we know what to ask?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the good things about the evolution of insurance is it's gotten better as time's gone on, and a lot of the coverages that I deal with on the personal line side of things are all risk comprehensive coverages. So, you know, they're very broad policies that should cover the vast majority of risks and perils that are going to, you know, apply to the typical, you know, landlord or homeowner. And then there's a lot of comprehensive add-ons to those policies these days that are available and are a lot simpler to explain and they're more affordable as well. Stuff such as sewer backup coverage, overland freshwater flooding coverage, hail coverages, depending on the insurer, something that is typically covered under an all-risk policy. However, some insurers have made it an option because they understand that people may want to self-insure. Now, some people may be questioning those decisions as with the recent events and some of the really major storms that we've had lately in Alberta. But again, it's knowing what's available and what you have. And there's a lot of resources. And I do encourage people to, you know, read their policies and go online. There's tons of resources online as far as insurance and specific coverages go, so that you can kind of educate yourself a little bit before you start to have those conversations. So you sort of have a little bit of a better understanding of what you're dealing with. And then when things are explained, it can sometimes be a little bit easier to understand. So yeah,
I appreciate that. With a group like this, it's essentially, you know, and that's the opportunity for Shelley to share a little bit. I'm sure everybody will be looking at their policies now. And I guess what it comes right down to is if you don't understand something on there, get the answers. And if you're not sure if you're covered for something, like, don't be afraid to ask, because I think that might happen is that we've got the side of maybe being busy, or maybe also I'll be maybe the first one to say is maybe sometimes it's ego where, you know, I don't understand it and I'm not going to ask about it. And so instead it should be like straight up, what is this? Do I have this? Does this say, what does this mean exactly? Like, to explain to me in a situation what this would be. So just what I'm hearing is being really, really clear on understanding those choices in our coverage.
Absolutely. And I mean, like I said, I'm a broker. I've been in this business for over 20 years, and I still a few times a week am going on Google because I compare, you know, people's policies with the policies I'm offering, and I need to do a point-for-point comparison. And some companies offer coverages with different, you know, words, different types of packages, and I don't know what exactly they mean, so I have to Google them, look them up, see what's covered within that package. Oh, okay, this is covered, and now I can compare it to the coverages that I'm offering. So it never hurts to get the highlighter out, you know, get Google out, take a look, and then, you know, write a list and talk to your broker, because you should really on at least a basic level understand all the points of coverage on your policy, at least the declaration page, and then when it comes to some of the specific coverages, then your broker can lead you into the wordings if need be to see where some of the fine print is and some of the points that you need to keep in consideration. Yeah.
And it's funny because you mentioned that, and I'm thinking, with your 20 years experience or however years experience you said you had in insurance, and I'm thinking it's not as easy for us. Like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm like, I know when I was reviewing my policies, I think you were the third or fourth person I came across, and I have to be honest, I was just about ready to throw in the towel because I think I was more confused than when I'd started. You know, and then honestly, you get the sales side in, and that's what I'll say. My work with Paul, I never felt like he was selling me. Like, I needed to get in. We need to have insurance for what we want to have it. I lean a little bit, and I'll be cautious in the group, but I lean a little bit to the self-insurance side on certain things. And I've had a lot of experience on the opposite. So then I find sometimes we stop somewhere along the line, and maybe I'm the only one that'll admit this, but I'm honest, but to being completely fully honest, because we feel like we're going to get sold. I'm going to get sold something else or something bigger or some extra add-on that when you say insurance is simplified, I actually feel like it's become more complex because there's so many more options out there. And the fact that you shared that you actually will Google and review, like, I think that is amazing. And I actually also see that as something that you can do a lot better than I could. Like, being completely honest.
Absolutely.
So I'm really glad to have you on my team. And that's not to push Paul, guys. It's just for anybody listening. It's just to know that this is about a support and making sure that everyone has what they need to have. And, you know, ask those questions of your own broker, of your own insurance agent, make those lists, but make sure that you have that relationship, because if you don't know and you're not comfortable, then there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And I'd say on an average policy, again, they're very comprehensive all risk. When we quote, we typically want to quote as much coverage as we possibly can, but at the same time, explain that to the client. And, you know, here's what you're getting for that. And here's the things that are optional. And here's what it means if you don't have those coverages. And here's where deductibles can bring some of those costs down. And then you start to factor in, well, and we had that discussion about hail and depreciated roof settlement. And at the end of the day, some of the properties, it just didn't make sense to have that coverage for your average, you know, hailstorm where they were going to be depreciated. And that's one of the things from a hail perspective that I encourage everybody to do is talk to your broker about what's my hail coverage? How does it work? Do you do any depreciation on my roof? Where does it stand right now? So that you know when you look at your policy, you know, my roof is 12 years old. It's going to be depreciated 30%. My deductible is $2,500. Does it make sense for me to put through a hail claim or even carry that coverage? If I raise my deductible, where does that put me from a cost savings? So it's all the kind of things that a broker should really be going over with their clients to let them know. One other thing to mention as well is there should never be a situation where coverage is removed from a policy and an insured doesn't know about it. That's one of the things that is in every province's code of conduct. It's one of those things where you know, there has to be written notice given to the insured if a coverage is to be reduced or removed ahead of time, so that you have the option to either get coverage elsewhere or, you know, accept the fact that you're not going to have that coverage. So it's something that's very important. And it was also mentioned that we also carry our own insurance. So if I make a mistake and somebody has a claim and something's not covered that they thought, then there's a process that happens to determine if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and then my insurance would kick in to cover that situation if the insurance company wasn't going to do it. So so at the end of the day, we don't want to ever see that situation, because typically it's you know, it's going to be a little more drawn out. But again, you know, those are within your rights. You should know that you have the option to take those kinds of actions if you don't think you've been treated fairly. So, and each province has their own insurance you know, authority that handles those types of complaints.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because that's what I was shocked to think that something could change. Like, I get my policies and they increase, but I didn't ever think that the actual coverage of what I've agreed to coverage would change. So that's good to know that that's not supposed to happen. But what I'm hearing from what Shelley shared is that it actually can happen. And so then there's some rights and recourse that we can do in the event of something like that occurring. I've got a few questions coming in. Certainly, you know, I know we touched on the deductibles. Is there a rule of thumb? Like, I know they do it with life insurance on kind of rule of thumbs on how we kind of do the dime method or whatever to determine how much we should have for coverage. How would you look at that in forms of deductibles? Like, I think mostly that's somewhat personal preference on how much you can handle a risk. But as Shelley's sharing today, she could potentially have 3 risks happening at once. So, you know, in that, what would you say or suggest, Paul, when we're trying to weigh out deductibles?
That's a great question. And there's not really a simple answer, but there are definitely ways to handle it for each individual. It really comes down to the individual situation. Like if you have 3 properties that are within close proximity of each other, and you're going to save 10% on your premium for, say, hail, or generally on your policies if you're doing the general deductible, and you raise it to 5,000, then that's something you have to let your client know that, hey, if you have a hail loss, these 3 homes are close together, you could be looking at a $15,000 deductible. Plus, if there's any depreciation going to be factored into your roofs, could be a pretty hefty bill. So again, those are, the typical deductible, as was mentioned earlier, is about $1,000. That's pretty much the same on your average homeowner's policy and on a personal side landlord policy. Again, it comes down in some part to the insurer, how much incentive they offer for higher deductible, and some give better discounts than others when it comes to assuming a higher deductible or
Sounds
risk.
like my kind of game, where it's like a game of numbers to some degree. How much are we saving here? What could the cost be there? And I guess really putting it in situationally, because I know I certainly get stuck in the dollars and cents for sure, and looking at cash flow on rentals and how much can I save. But at the end of the day, I think it's also having that conversation or that thought on situationally, okay, if we're going to have these losses, this is the potential cost that could look like. And that would help people kind of land on that. I see also some other questions around, bringing multiple, primary home rentals and vehicles in to get greater discount. Now, Paul, I'll let you answer that, because I was pretty thrilled on some of what that looked like as far as multi-packages that you were able to do under the Mind Group.
Yeah, and typically on the personal side, whenever you have more properties, more vehicles, you're going to look at more discounts. That's usually the case. When you get on the commercial side, it's a little bit different. And again, the commercial personal threshold, it all depends on, your situation, the insurance company's appetite for, risk as far as the personal side. Some will only do a few rental properties. Some will do, up into the double digits. But typically when you're getting into the higher, double digit side, then you're probably looking at a commercial policy, which typically don't cross over into the personal side as far as discounts go. They're quite separate that way. And I think that's regulated such in each province. So if you're running, if your investment properties are pretty much your sole business, venture, then you're probably looking at a commercial side of things. If it's your only source of income, if there's multiple principals or investors involved, if you have more than several dozen more properties, depending on the company again, if there's specialty risks involved, if there's rooming or student housing or certain things like that, you're probably looking at more of a commercial side. But if you have a company name, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go commercial. If you have a company, you're the only principal, it's the sole reason is for basically a holding component for your investments, then typically we can handle that on a personal side again if you're not talking a high number of properties. But it always helps usually on the personal side, the more you have, the more discounts you typically get. And
so with that, I'm still kind of chuckling about how insurance is simplified, because I think I'm still more confused. But so with that, I think the same, asking lots of questions, making sure it's clear if you should have personal or commercial, or which side or where that's landing on the tipping, because we've got a lot of investors here who are growing, but maybe still in the personal side, maybe looking at the difference between, I almost think that's similar to the conversation about when we incorporate or not. And so in all of those kinds of levels throughout the growth of our business, I think is that each area needs to be looked at, right? Our finance, our insurance, each area as we build and grow our business, and ensuring that those policies are still fitting the needs. As long as things are disclosed accurately, it sounds to me like it's okay for us to still be on the personal side, depending on what size. And then maybe at a certain level, it's better for to tip over to the commercial. And that's something our broker would probably support us in helping figure out as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you get into the really larger operations where you're looking at dozens of properties and stuff like that, then you're definitely on the commercial side, and not just a commercial broker, typically in tandem with the risk manager, and because you're talking about a lot of dollars, a lot of exposure, and there's a lot of different factors that start to come into play when you get up to that that level of operation.
Yeah, for sure. And I could see that. I'm very excited to get to that level, into the huge multifamily. But for now, I think just getting a handle on what this looks like. I think a lot of our group does mainly some small suited, a number of doors for sure, but not quite into the full multifamily commercial kind of zone. But who knows, maybe we'll buy an apartment building here coming up soon with the group. Who knows? I always throw out different ideas. I'm just watching. Does anybody else have any questions specifically, either for Shelley or for Paul, around, we'll stick with the topic of insurance, obviously, and just whether it's around the tenancy side of it or any other pieces, and certainly any offers, Paul and Shelley, yourselves, that you'd like to kind of put out to the group. There will be a lot of other people watching this on recording afterwards as well. So I just want to make sure everyone's got a chance to kind of cover what you wanted to cover tonight.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple of things from a standard sort of coverage perspective, things that people should look out for on their policy. I mean, this may sound like a no-brainer, but the dwelling, how much are you insured for? What does that mean? What does it mean if you have a total loss? What are your loss settlement options? Is it guaranteed replacement? If it's found out that you're not insured to a certain percentage of actual rebuild costs, what does that mean if you have a claim? A full claim or a partial claim? There can be deductible. There can be clauses in your policy that can affect the amount you're paid if you're not insured to full replacement amount. Again, that depends on the policy that you have, whether it's an all-risk replacement cost policy, or if it's a named perils actual cash value policy. Then those things can be drastically different as far as claims a settlement goes. So very important to ask those kinds of questions with your broker. Detached structures on the property, what kind of coverage do you have? Typically on the personal side, we'd have automatic coverage for those kinds of things, but some companies have limits on them. Some companies offer single limits on even rented dwelling policies, which would cover you for sort of a maximum amount on dwelling, detached structures, additional living expenses, which can sometimes include rental income, and sometimes you have to buy it separately, depending on the insurance company. Liability coverage, it's typically pretty uniform across, but again, what are the specific exclusions? And the exclusions is something that are important as well, because you don't always, a lot of the all risk coverage policies, you're pretty much covered for everything except what's specifically excluded. So those are the things that you wanted to focus on if you want to be brave and take a dive into some insurance documents. If you look at your wording, exclusions would be a good place to start, because that tells you what's not covered and under what circumstances it wouldn't be covered. So good place to start there. And then some of the more recent developments and sort of beefed up products around sewer backup, overland water coverage, how they work together. Typically, some companies, it's very complicated. They have 4 levels of water damage coverage you can buy. Others, it's simple, expanded, extended water damage coverages. So it's good to ask those questions. Take a look at your policy. What's your limits? Some of them are full policy limits. Some of them are can be 5,000, 10,000. And then deductibles, always good to look at, see what your deductibles are in each of those cases, because some companies will have different deductibles for different types of losses. It's common to have sometimes a $2,000 deductible on water damage losses or hail, as opposed to a regular $1,000 deductible.
Okay.
Depreciated roof settlement we talked about. As your roof ages, if you have a claim, you're only going to pay a certain percentage. So your roof would be devalued by a percentage based on what it would cost to replace it due to the age of the roof. So, and different companies do different things on those lines. It's good to try and get your head around that so you understand what kind of coverage you have, because if your roof's an older roof, you may not have much. So better know that up front, right? Or maybe find a company that doesn't do that if you wanted to have that more fully covered. And then rental income is another coverage that can sometimes be added as part as a separate coverage or be part of a package And there are some different coverages. I know on the commercial side, you can get coverage where they'll pay your rental income even when the house is repaired or the unit's repaired. Whereas personal policies, typically once it's repaired, whether it's rented or not, the coverage stops. So there's those kinds of things to keep in mind. So
the other thing I would mention, and I'm glad you brought up the rental income, because that was one thing I was thinking is, I know one of the policies we have is 2 years loss of rental income. Let's say if there's a fire and, rebuilding. And I did have a friend who's a landlord, one of his units did completely burn down. So he's in that whole process. But the only other thing I would also recommend checking that I haven't heard you say, so I don't know if you offer it or not, when it comes to tenant damages, we went from tenant damaging the place. I had full coverage. Again, this is another change I discovered that I was not told about. But so I've always said, I have full coverage. If a tenant damages my house, I have full coverage. And you hope to mitigate that. Well, it turns out that they've changed it from a one-time deductible to every incident is a deductible. So if they kicked in the wall, the drywall, that's one incident in one room. In another room, well, that's another incident. So that's another deductible. So the whole house can be destroyed, and I would have to pay multiple amounts of deductible. And I did have a tenant, they had a mental health breakdown, and it's amazing what they can do. They were there 3.5 years. It's amazing what they can do in one night.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So $18,000 worth of damage later that I was not covered for. So I'll be going through the court system to get that from them. And that's another story. But surprised to find that, again, find out from your insurance, is it a per incident, meaning per room, or per wall to the floor? Those are both considered two separate situations as well. Or is it just a one-time deductible for the whole house coverage? So find that out in your insurance as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, that's a good point, because in a situation like that, you'd want to confirm with your insurer how they're going to look at that. Mm-hmm. It may make it the decision between whether they want to go with that insurer or not. It sounds to me like, and again, if you're in a claim situation, you don't always have to take what's being told to you by an adjuster. You do have recourse through your broker or through, different levels within the company if you're not happy with how things are being, adjudicated as far as your claim goes, because, the courts have looked at those types of things in different ways. And if it's not specifically mentioned in your policy in the wording, again, the fine print, whether those things can be split, those events can be split out per deductible, or whether, the courts have typically decided that if somebody just, vandalizes your place, it's considered, if it happened in an evening, that's one event. So again, those are good questions to ask your broker, and usually something that can be found in the wording.
The other thing I think it's important to talk about too is when it comes to the, am I saying the right word, Paul? Adjudicate, like when they're giving me when the guys come in to see how much damage I have in that quote.
Oh,
is that
appraiser.
Appraisers.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So what I've been told by Aviva is that the appraisers will come through. They'll give me the quote on my property of what they consider. And so then my choice is I can have them farm it out. They'll take off my deductible. So let's say it's $50,000, take off my $5,000 deductible. They'll cover the $50,000. I just have to write them a check for $5,000. My next choice is we can have it go to one of my quotes. I can get quotes done. They'll pay them, but they'll take off the $5,000. So of the $50,000, they'll give me a check for $45,000, and no, they won't give me a check. They'll pay it to the companies for $45,000. Or I can take a cash settlement of the $50,000, but they're only going to give me $80,000 or 80% minus my $5,000. So they'll go to 40%, 40,000, take away 5. I'll get a check for 35,000. And she said, it's because we don't want you making money. I said, making money? You're not covering half of my damages. Honey, I'm not making money off this. I'm just trying to minimize my financial loss right now. And I'm like, if it costs you $50,000, if it's $50,000, why would you just not give me $50,000 so I can just get the work done? Like, I don't understand.
Well, and they must be different, because I've worked with a lot of people, like my husband being a contractor. We've done tons of claims where they have just got the money that was agreed upon and hired their own contractors. So I wonder if we're being getting into that claim and adjuster side too much, but for what Paul's end of things are, but to my understanding, it sounds to me like it's that battle back between what you're being offered and how each different adjuster or insurance company might handle it. I don't know, Paul, my way off.
My last one, it gave me, my last one
No.
gave me the full amount. Like for that insurance thing, they just wrote me a check for $25,000. This one, they're like, oh, it'll be 80% minus your deductibles. And I'm like, that's not even enough.
Mm-hmm. In a situation like that, typically you're only going to get a depreciated value if you're taking cash rather than allowing the insurance company to pay your preferred vendor to do the work.
Oh, I see.
Because you could take the cash and not pay anybody and just leave it, fix it yourself, or not fix it at all. So,
which is still your choice, though. You have a devalued house, though, so I mean, it's still costing you, right?
It's a common clause in most insurance policies. If you're going to take a cash settlement, that they're going to do a depreciated value. However, you can purchase options on some policies, depending on the company, that if you take that option, they don't depreciate it.
Wow, that's good to know.
Wow. We're learning so much tonight.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Because it'll be faster to go through my guys than to wait for insurance with their preferred vendors. They're so backed up. I'd rather just get the work done.
Like there's a lot of people now, especially you see a lot of people moving to rental housing, selling their homes, and they thought, well, if I ever have a loss, I wouldn't necessarily want to rebuild this home. But I don't want to take, an 80, 70, 60%, depreciation. But then if they were to get that clause and be able to get the full replacement value, sell the land, get a condo, and then, you're not out that depreciated amount. So it is typically an option.
What I'm hearing, though, from what you said, Paul, is it sounds like Shelley should be going back for some clarity there, because she's not asking for a cash payout. She's wanting to pay her own preferred contractors.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, I wonder if there's some kind of misunderstanding, Shelley, or what's happening, because to me, I'm hearing two different things. Is you should be able to get that amount and choose your own contractors. It's not a cash settlement that you're asking for.
No, I just want to get my guys in to get it done, because I'll get it done faster because I have teams of people that'll do this.
Absolutely. That's why it was same within the flood, that we had the one property we were doing was done and complete before half of the other ones had even started remediation. It was so crazy, right? So you don't want to wait, get your teams on there. And that's part of why we have this group together as well, is to keep, share those resources and keep those teams working for us here in Calgary specifically. I do see a few more questions and I realize times. So I see that Diane has asked in regards to actually seeing the policy for their tenants. I do ask to actually see the policy. Now, I won't say that I've ever been remiss in every single year getting that back in vision. It is written in my tenancy agreement. Shelley, tell me, how specific are you on making sure you actually see that tenant policy every year?
I get them to send me a copy of their binder letter, which then I forward on to my insurance, or I just keep in the file in case my insurance ever asks for it. And then every year at renewal, they're required to give me a new updated binder letter showing that service has been, insurance has been continuous. And I tell them right when they first sign, if you cancel this, because they can, if they want to be deceitful, that is considered a breach of your contract. And if I discover that, then it's an immediate eviction process. Or if I discover that, at lease renewal, we just got the new one here instead of the lease renewal binder letter, I'll be like, we have a problem. What happened to the insurance all along? So it's just the binder letter that you need, because to me, they've gone in to get, I've told them what to get. If they choose not to get it, now that liability is on them because they are told to have the tenant insurance. And I tell them that's the cost. You will be sued by my insurance.
And how much chasing do you do? At the end of the day, they've signed off. I've asked for it. Should I stand on my head and evict this great tenant because they are remiss and they're young people and they're just not sending me a copy? And maybe, Paul, what are your thoughts on our requirements as landlords to actually have it in hand versus we communicated it, we asked for it, we got it documented, they signed off saying they've got it. If at the end of the day, they cancel that or don't produce a copy to us, have we done enough due diligence?
Yeah, that's a good question. It all depends too. Some insurers require that your tenants have insurance in place as well. So they're going to want to see from you proof that your tenant has insurance. So that's something that, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to the relationship you have with the tenant. From a broker perspective, there's a slight privacy issue there. So we really are limited if the person's insured with us as to what we can tell landlords, whether they have or don't have coverage. We do have a product through our online offering through zipsure.ca, where it's a discount tenant online, completely self-service, where they can get low-cost tenant insurance. And I believe there's a component in there that allows landlords to have some notifications on that side of things. I know for some of our bigger landlords, that's and some landlords are doing. There's a program that's in place as well where landlords would charge tenant insurance as part of the rent.
Oh,
And the insurance is done through the landlord for the tenant. So there's options out there for that as well, and that takes sort of the the guesswork out of it.
yeah, it's good to hear that there's different pieces. I mean, I certainly ask for a copy of it. I stay on top of it, but I also respect, you know, what's being shared in the chat, and the fact that I have had tenants where there's nothing wrong with them. I believe them that they have the insurance actually, but they are just impossible to get the actual document out of. So, you know, I think just kind of being aware on where that kind of lands. I think just kind of wrapping up here, it looks like just some other questions around from our membership, what it might look like, Paul, to have their policies reviewed by you. Like if they wanted to reach out and just get a second opinion. We don't want to overwhelm you, but I also assume part of this is your job. So we you know, respecting your time as well. But what would you say? What would that look? Do you want people to reach out to you individually, or?
Absolutely. The best time typically to review a policy is you know, from our perspective, is before renewal. So you know, within 45 days of your renewal, it is a great time to review. I mean, it's always a good time to pick up your policy and take a look at it. And if you have specific questions, you know, it's typically best to direct those to your current broker. But as a salesperson, obviously, I do reviews for people all the time. So what I typically do is people call in, they'll want a quote, or they'll send information through email. I'll send information I need to. We've done that. Laura, I've sent you information sheets that you filled out, send back to me, and then you send a copy of your current policy. Whether the premiums are on there or not, doesn't matter to me. I'm going to choose the best coverage for the best value that I think's out there, and let you know what all the options are. Again, we're a broker. If it's through a group, it doesn't always have to be through the group company. That's why one of the good things about having a broker is we have lots of options. And I will do a line-by-line comparison, let you know where I think, you know, you might have too much or not enough, you're underinsured, or coverages that are missing that would typically be on a policy. Yeah, that's what I do day in, day out. So yeah, at any time, if you're really worried about something, you can send it to me right away. If you just like to get a good review on renewal, then like I said, 45 to 30 days ahead of time, I'll have my information distributed, and by all means get in touch.
What I'd like to do, and with this topic, you might find, with or without the renewal being around the corner, people are going to be probably more interested to get things reviewed sooner than later while it's on top of mind, or else we forget.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but what I'd like to do is just post your information, Paul and Shelley. I'd like to post, if you know, would email, like just permission wise, is it okay if I post your emails out on our group?
Sure.
That people can reach out? I'm sure people are going to have more questions, and there's a lot of people who weren't on live tonight, so there's going to be a lot of people watching this over the next few days. So of course, the other piece and caveat is I don't want you guys inundated with emails, so we'll just put it out there that as people are messaging, you know, maybe they'll put a piece in there as response to the YYC rental housing talk, and be cognizant that both Shelley and Paul are very busy people, and Shelley's got an awful lot on her plate right now, but I'm sure you'll be happy to answer other questions, but give her some time to get back, guys. Like, let's know that there's a lot on everyone's plate, and I think that everyone in the membership is usually really cognizant and reasonable with that too.
Yeah, it is our busiest time of the year right now through the summertime. I mean, it just happens to be the highest volume, but typically if someone reaches out to me, I'm going to get back to them right away and set an expectation of when you can expect to hear some results from me. So
I'm usually pretty quick too. Unfortunately, this last 2 weeks have been a little bit slow, as I think you've noticed, Laura. I'm usually right away on my emails. But a big key to me is in the subject line, put your question or what the problem is, so then I can also prioritize how quick I need to get back to you. It's just more efficient if I know exactly what you're going to ask me. But yeah, I have no problem talking to anyone about it.
Okay. Well, I really, really appreciate it, guys. And that's what we're here for. And then just, finishing that off at our YYC Rental Housing Providers Group, I'm hoping to bring on more and more Calgary landlords so we can share those resources. I'm certainly, of course, available to anybody too for, whatever questions, one-offs, whether it's in the Facebook group or through email. So we'll make sure everyone knows how to reach everyone. Have a fantastic, I hope you have a good rest of your night. It's an absolute beautiful day out there. So maybe we can get a little bit of sunshine maybe, I don't know. And thank you guys so much. I just appreciate so much what we were able to share tonight. I feel like I'm full. I feel like I've learned so much.
Thank you, Paul, too. I've got some validation and some spots to go forward with. So thank you. And thank you, Laura, for hosting.
Yeah, thanks
awesome.
for having us, Laura. And thanks, Shelley, for sharing your experience again. It's great.
Great. All right. Have a super night. Thanks so much, guys. We'll talk real soon.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Good night.